Revenge with Marvella. My eldest son delivered the verdict over coffee in my own kitchen, the one I designed when I built this company from nothing 30 years ago. "You're not sharp anymore, Mom," Marcus said, stirring his cup like we were discussing the weather. "You've slowed down." "It's okay. We'll take it from here." I was still holding the board packet I'd prepared the night before, 73 pages of analysis on the new defense contract we were negotiating. I'd highlighted every compliance issue, every technical specification that needed revision, every timeline that seemed too ambitious. Marcus didn't even glance at it. Neither did his brother. They'd already decided without me. I could see it in how they wouldn't meet my eyes, how they'd position themselves on either side of the kitchen island like this was a planned intervention. They called it a family business alignment meeting when they sent the calendar invite. I arrived at our conference room 15 minutes early, the way I always did, carrying my files and my laptop and 3 decades of institutional knowledge they seemed to think had evaporated with my 60th birthday. I was seated at the far end of the table. No agenda copy waiting at my place. No nameplate. No vote mentioned in the meeting outline projected on the screen. Just smiles from Marcus and his brother Kyle that didn't reach their eyes, that corporate politeness people use when they're managing someone out. The room filled with our senior team, people I'd hired and trained and promoted. They nodded at me with that same careful courtesy. Then Marcus stood up and introduced someone I didn't recognize. A military representative from the Defense Contract Management Agency. Commander Hayes from the DCMA sat across from me, crisp uniform and watchful eyes, while Kyle explained my presence to the room like I was a museum piece on loan. "Mom built the early stuff," Kyle said with an indulgent smile. "She established our initial contracts back in the 90s. But she's stepped back now to enjoy retirement. She's just here for continuity." I hadn't stepped back. I was still working 50-hour weeks, still reviewing every technical specification, still the only person in the company who understood the complete history of our defense portfolio. Commander Hayes looked straight at me instead of my sons, his gaze lingering for a moment before he returned his attention to the presentation Marcus was starting. Something in that look felt like recognition. Like he'd seen this dynamic before and knew what it meant. Commander Hayes asked a technical question 20 minutes into Marcus's presentation, something specific about the redundancy protocols in our proposed communication system. It was a good question, the kind that separated people who understood defense requirements from people who'd just read the briefing materials. Marcus answered confidently, citing specifications from our engineering report. Kyle nodded in agreement, adding details about our testing timeline. They were both wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally wrong about how the system actually functioned. I corrected them quietly, my voice barely louder than the hum of the projector. "The redundancy operates on a different principle," I said. "Dual path routing, not backup switching. It's in Section 7 of the technical documentation." The room went silent. Commander Hayes stopped taking notes. He looked at me again, longer this time, then back at my sons. After the meeting ended, Marcus and Kyle pulled me aside in the hallway outside the conference room. Their polite masks had slipped. "You embarrassed us in there," Marcus said, his voice low and tight. "We had it handled." Kyle stepped closer, trying for a gentler approach but failing. "Mom, we appreciate your experience, but we need to present a unified front. Contradicting us in front of clients makes us look disorganized." I pointed out that I'd corrected a significant technical error, that giving wrong information to a DCMA representative could jeopardize the entire contract. They exchanged that look siblings share when they think a parent is being difficult. Marcus touched my shoulder like I was fragile. "Maybe it's better if you don't attend the next one. Less stressful for you." That night, I went in my home office and checked the contract files I'd been keeping since we started this negotiation. The files didn't line up anymore. I sat at my desk until 2 in the morning, cross-referencing documents I'd drafted with the versions now in our system. Timelines had been altered, extended in ways that violated our standard protocols. Compliance language I'd carefully crafted had been softened, made vague, and open to interpretation. Sign-offs were missing from critical decision points. Technical specifications I'd reviewed and approved had been changed without new engineering assessments. My name had been removed from authorization chains on documents I'd personally developed. It was subtle, this editing. Someone who didn't know our history with defense contracts might not notice. But I'd built these systems. I knew every requirement, every regulation, every standard we'd promised to meet. They were dismantling 30 years of careful compliance, probably without even realizing what they were risking. They framed it as concern when they came to my office 3 days later. Both my sons, sitting across from my desk with sympathetic expressions and a typed proposal. "It's time you rest, Mom," Kyle said gently. "You've earned it." They suggested a reduced role, a consultant title with no day-to-day access. Emeritus status. I could keep my office, keep my email, attend quarterly board meetings if I felt up to it. "No pressure," Marcus added. "We just want you to enjoy your life without all the stress." The documents were already prepared, the new organizational chart already designed. My assistant had already been reassigned. I signed the papers they put in front of me. But first, that morning before they arrived, I'd archived everything. Every file, every email, every document that showed how our systems actually worked. I signed away my authority and kept my knowledge. I cleared my office while they were at lunch the following Monday, boxing up 3 decades of work in careful silence. No speeches. No confrontation. No tearful goodbyes to staff who looked away when I walked past. Just systematic packing, organizing, preserving. My awards went into one box. My reference materials into another. My personal files, the ones containing every contract we'd ever negotiated and every lesson I'd learned, into a third. I took one hard drive they didn't know existed, a backup system I'd maintained independently because I'd learned early in my career that institutional memory dies when it lives in only one place. By the time Marcus and Kyle returned, my office was empty except for furniture. They seemed relieved. Kyle hugged me. Marcus thanked me for being so understanding about the transition. Neither of them asked what I'd taken home. The first call I didn't expect came on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after I'd cleaned out my office. Commander Hayes from the DCMA contacted me directly. Not the company. Not my sons. My personal cell phone, the number I rarely gave out. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice formal but not unfriendly. "I'm following up on some technical questions about your company's proposal." I asked if he'd spoken with Marcus or Kyle, if they'd directed him to me. "I'm speaking with you specifically," he replied. "I noticed some discrepancies between the initial proposal documents and the recent revision. I was hoping you could clarify the changes." My stomach tightened. I asked what kind of discrepancies he'd found. He paused, then asked a question that changed everything. "Have you reviewed the latest revision to the technical specifications?" I told him the truth. I told him I hadn't reviewed the latest revision because I was no longer in an operational role. Then I told him what I suspected. The revision likely violated 3 separate protocols we'd established years ago for this exact type of contract. Protocols that existed because we'd learned hard lessons about what defense systems needed and what shortcuts were never acceptable. The silence on his end lasted long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. Then his tone changed completely. "Can you prove that?" he asked quietly. I could. I spent that evening preparing a detailed analysis, cross-referencing the new specifications against our established standards, against DCMA requirements, against the promises we'd made in our original proposal. I emailed him everything at midnight. His response came 30 minutes later. "We need to talk further. This is serious." The second meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from my former assistant, who called me apologetically to say she thought I should know. The meeting was with Commander Hayes and 2 other DCMA officials. High stakes. Contract continuation review. I thanked her and hung up. Then I got dressed in my best suit, the navy one I'd worn to our biggest negotiations, and drove to the office I'd left 2 weeks earlier. I arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled start time. Walked past the reception desk where the new girl didn't recognize me. Took the elevator to the 4th floor conference room. Opened the door and stepped inside. The room froze when I walked in. Marcus's mouth actually fell open. Kyle stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Marcus recovered first, trying to regain control. This is a sensitive meeting. We'll handle this. Kyle moved toward me like he might physically escort me out. You don't have authorization to be in this room anymore. Commander Hayes raised a hand, stopping my son's mid-approach. Actually, he said calmly, I have questions for Mrs. Patterson specifically. I requested her presence. That was a lie. He hadn't requested anything. But his eyes met mine with something that looked like respect, and I understood we were on the same side of something my sons didn't see yet. Marcus tried to argue. Commander, with all due respect, my mother isn't current on the technical details of this contract. Hayes closed the folder in front of him with a soft snap that somehow felt louder than shouting. Then let's test that assumption. The question Commander Hayes asked was devastatingly specific. Who designed the failsafe mechanism in the primary communication array, and what redundancy principle does it operate on? Marcus and Kyle hesitated, looking at each other. They'd sat through presentations. They'd read summaries. But they didn't know the system the way someone who'd built it from nothing would know it. The engineering team designed it, Marcus finally said. Based on industry-standard backup protocols. Wrong. I answered without looking at notes, without hesitation, because I'd spent 6 months developing that system with our lead engineer who'd since retired. I explained the dual-path routing, the specific failure scenarios we'd designed for, the testing protocols we'd established, the modifications we'd made after the initial DCMA review 3 years ago. Commander Hayes listened. So did the 2 officials who'd come with him. My sons stood there looking lost. Commander Hayes stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. He looked at Marcus, then at Kyle, then at the other officials who'd accompanied him. I need the room, he said. Not a request. A command, delivered calmly, but with absolute authority. Marcus started to protest. Commander, this is our company's conference room. We need to be present for I need the room, Hayes repeated, his tone unchanged. This is a federal contract review. I'm exercising my authority under DCMA protocols to conduct a private interview with your technical personnel. You can wait outside. The 2 other officials were already standing, already moving toward the door. My sons looked at me like I'd betrayed them somehow, like I'd orchestrated this humiliation. Kyle's face was red. Marcus's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The door closed behind them with a soft click that felt final. Commander Hayes waited until the footsteps faded down the hallway before he spoke. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be direct with you. This contract is under review. Not routine review. Formal investigation review. He opened his folder again, showed me pages of flagged discrepancies, technical violations, compliance failures. The only reason it hasn't been terminated already is the institutional safeguards you built into the original proposal. Your protocols have been preventing complete failure, but they're being systematically dismantled. I felt cold despite the warm room. He continued. I need to know if what's happening here is negligence or something more deliberate. I need to know if you're willing to provide testimony about the original contract terms, the technical requirements, and the changes that have been made. I looked at the documents spread across the table. Looked at 30 years of my life's work being torn apart by people who thought experience expired with age. I didn't confront my sons when they finally came back into the room after my hour-long conversation with Commander Hayes. I didn't explain what we discussed or what I'd agreed to do. I just gathered my things and left, driving home in silence while my phone buzzed with increasingly angry texts from Marcus. Instead, I documented. I logged every conversation, every technical decision, every warning I'd given that had been ignored. I organized 3 decades of institutional knowledge into clear, chronological, irrefutable evidence of how our company actually functioned and where it had gone wrong. I waited. The audit notice went out 4 weeks later on a Monday morning, official Department of Defense letterhead, requiring comprehensive documentation of all technical specifications, design decisions, and authorization chains for the past 18 months. My sons suddenly needed my help. The panic phone calls started within an hour of the audit notice arriving. Marcus called first, his voice tight with stress. Mom, this is serious. They're asking for documentation we don't have. They want design justifications for changes we made months ago. Kyle called next, trying for diplomatic. We need your help to reconstruct some of the technical history. Your files, your records. I let them talk. Let them explain how the auditors were questioning their competence, their decision-making, their understanding of defense contract requirements. Let them tell me how much trouble the company was in, how much money we could lose, how our reputation was at stake. I made sympathetic sounds, asked clarifying questions, said I'd need to think about how I could help. But I said nothing about what I'd already provided to Commander Hayes. Nothing about the testimony I'd already given. I just let them panic while I waited for the next move. The email that leaked changed everything in ways my sons hadn't anticipated. An internal video from their leadership retreat 6 months earlier surfaced somehow, sent to the entire company distribution list and several key investors. In it, Marcus and Kyle joked about aging out leadership while sitting by a pool with drinks in their hands. About me specifically. Mom's brilliant, but it's time for new thinking, Kyle said on camera, laughing. We can't let the company be run by someone who learned technology in the 1990s. Marcus added, we'll ease her out gently. Keep her feeling valued. But decision-making needs to move to our generation. The video was only 90 seconds long. It destroyed months of their careful narrative about concern and retirement and my best interests. Investors saw it. The board saw it. By afternoon, my phone was ringing with board members asking if I'd known I was being pushed out. The board turned faster than my sons could have imagined possible. Emergency meeting called for Friday afternoon, 2 days after the video leaked. Closed-door votes. Motions to reinstate my operational authority. My name returned to documents, my access restored, my title changed from Consultant Emeritus back to Chief Technical Officer. Marcus and Kyle tried to explain the video as a joke taken out of context, as casual conversation not meant to represent actual business decisions. But the damage was already done. The optics were devastating. A company built by a woman being quietly dismantled by her sons while government auditors circled overhead, while defense contracts hung in the balance, while institutional knowledge walked out the door in cardboard boxes. The board members weren't stupid. They knew what they were looking at. They knew what happened to companies that lost their technical foundations while chasing new leadership. The military report arrived 3 weeks after my reinstatement, delivered through official channels to the board and the executive team. Commander Hayes had been thorough. His report was clinical, unforgiving, final. It documented every technical violation, every compliance failure, every shortcut that had been taken in the 18 months since my sons had started edging me out. It traced the degradation of our protocols directly to specific management decisions. It noted the correlation between my reduced role and the increase in critical errors. It recommended contract suspension pending comprehensive technical review. The conclusion was particularly devastating. Current leadership has demonstrated insufficient understanding of defense system requirements and inadequate respect for established safety protocols. Contract continuation is contingent on verified technical oversight by qualified personnel. The contract was frozen that afternoon. Millions of dollars in revenue stopped flowing. The company's future hung by a thread. My sons tried remorse first when they came to my home office that evening. We didn't mean it like that, Marcus said, standing in my doorway like a child caught cheating. We were trying to modernize, to move faster. We thought we understood the systems well enough. Kyle tried blame next. The engineering team should have caught these issues. They should have told us the changes were problematic. When neither approach worked, when I just sat there looking at them calmly, they moved to fear. Raw, undisguised panic. Mom, we're going to lose everything. The company. The contracts. Jobs. What do we do? I reminded them I'd warned them years ago. I'd told them that defense work required patience, precision, institutional memory. I'd explained why our protocols existed, why shortcuts were dangerous, why experience mattered in an industry where mistakes could cost lives. They'd thought I was being old-fashioned. They'd thought innovation meant moving fast and breaking things. The public reinstatement came through a press release the board insisted on, damage control for investors and clients, and the defense community watching our implosion. The announcement credited foundational leadership returning to operational oversight and recommitment to technical excellence. They didn't mention my age. They mentioned my record. 30 years of successful defense contracts. Zero safety violations. Consistent delivery on complex systems. They quoted Commander Hayes' report, the parts about institutional safeguards and verified technical oversight. They emphasized continuity and reliability and proven leadership. One of my sons resigned that day. Kyle, the younger one, who'd been the gentler face of pushing me out. He submitted a brief letter citing personal reasons and the need to pursue other opportunities. Marcus stayed, but in a diminished role, reporting to me now instead of the other way around. The company survived. Barely. And only because I'd been careful about what I'd archived and what I'd been willing to testify about. Commander Hayes requested a private conversation 2 weeks after the restructuring, meeting me at a coffee shop downtown instead of the office. He thanked me for my cooperation during the investigation, for my detailed testimony, for my willingness to stand up for standards even when it meant standing against my own family. They almost lost everything, he said quietly, stirring his coffee. The contract, the company, their reputation in the defense community. Then he added something that surprised me. You didn't. He was right. I hadn't lost anything except the illusion that my sons understood what I'd built. Hayes leaned forward. I'm not supposed to do this, but there's a consulting position opening up. DCMA technical oversight. We need people who understand both the systems and the politics. People who won't fold under pressure. He slid a folder across the table. Think about it. I took the folder home and read it 3 times before deciding. The final boardroom meeting I chaired felt different than any that had come before. I took my seat at the head of the table, the position I'd built this company to deserve, and looked around at faces I'd known for decades mixed with newer directors brought in during the crisis. No applause. No welcome back speeches. Just silence and the weight of expectation. We had work to do. Contracts to rebuild, protocols to reestablish, trust to restore with clients who'd watched our near collapse with concern. Marcus sat halfway down the table, his face carefully neutral, his posture small in a way I'd never seen before. I asked him to present his analysis of the engineering review, to explain what he'd learned from the audit process. He did, competently but without the swagger he used to carry. When he finished, I thanked him. Then I corrected 3 errors he'd missed, quietly and without embarrassment, teaching instead of punishing. I ended that meeting with one sentence that needed to be said, not to be cruel, but to be clear about what had changed and what hadn't. The board members were gathering their materials. Marcus was closing his laptop. The room was starting to shift into post-meeting small talk. I remained seated, waited for quiet, and spoke clearly enough that everyone heard. Competence doesn't expire, I said. Experience doesn't fade. And institutional knowledge isn't something you can replace with enthusiasm and good intentions. Remember that. Not loud. Not cruel. Just true. The room stayed silent for a moment, everyone understanding what I meant, what we'd all learned through pain and near disaster and humiliation. Then we moved on to the next agenda item. Marcus stayed after everyone else left, standing by the window while I packed up my notes. I'm sorry, he said finally. I told him I knew. I told him we'd work on rebuilding trust. But I also told him that some lessons only stick when they cost something. They'd thought experience faded with age, that competence had an expiration date, that authority was about generation rather than knowledge. They'd been wrong. And now everyone knew it.